Welcome everyone to the 8th episode of the Science and Healthcare Sustainability Podcast. We are absolutely delighted today to be joined by Harry from, you want to ask him?
Higher or higher?
Higher.
Higher.
Always
Definitely.
higher. Definitely higher. I said higher for the first year, but it's definitely higher.
Higher, okay. So we're absolutely delighted to have Harry here. We've been asking him for a while. When I think of a salesperson from a manufacturer who knows his stuff and knows his products inside out, this is the man I think of. So he knows everything about clean air and ultra low temperature and energy efficiency. So thank you, Harry, for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
No problem. First question, no surprises. What does sustainability mean to you?
Nice, easy question out the door. I think for me, it's a bit of a mindset. I think if you think about it sort of as a whole, sustainability is all about, reducing the long-term impact of getting to your goals. So you want to make sure that what you're trying to do or what you're trying to achieve isn't going to leave any lasting, damage that future generations are going to have to deal with. And that can be anywhere, you can see it now with the grid, start moving towards more sustainable options, more renewable options. That's definitely sustainability. Solar and wind don't rely on, finite resources like oil and gas. But then you also have logistics who are moving towards, more sustainable packaging, using more cardboard and less non-recyclable materials. But you also have, again, in the lab, where people are trying to make that transition from older, less sustainable units, ones that are going to have a long-term cost to them, whether that's financial or in this sense to the planet. And by moving that way, they're making sustainable moves. So in my mind, sustainability is that reduction in lasting impact of your actions. And having a sustainable mindset is changing your thought process to think not about the short-term cost, but what could the potential long-term cost be of what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely good answer. So honing in on the sort of lab side of things, what do you think the scale of the problem is in laboratories in the UK or no, here is an international business, wider afield as well?
I think there is a big problem with sustainability. I don't think so much it's a sentiment problem. I think it's just process. I think you look at how labs run now. So a tissue culture lab or even like a GMP lab, all the plastics in there are going to be virgin plastic. So that's, it's not made from recycling. In the majority of cases, no recyclable material has been used because of contamination. And then that'll be used once, or maybe not even used and just, thrown away. And then it has to go through the whole, anything that's gone into the lab becomes clinical waste. So it goes through this whole waste stream, which is really energy intensive, can involve incineration, autoclaving. And I think that's one of the, contributes to the scale of the problem. I also think that it's not just, I'm trying to avoid just speaking as an equipment manufacturer, but with the equipment too. I mean, a lot of this, you go into a science building and you'll look at their energy rating and it'll be right at the bottom, the G level, because a lot of the equipment they run is very high energy, or it puts out a lot of heat. And I think a hidden sort of environmental cost is air conditioning. In the labs, in freezer rooms, in tissue culture labs, all this equipment generates heat and you have to get rid of that heat somehow. So I do think there's a big problem with sustainability. I think it is getting better. I think we're definitely on a path to reducing that problem. But I'd say that sustainability is still an issue in the lab, definitely within the UK, but I do think globally as well.
Yeah, I think absolutely right. Look, we're seeing a huge difference with the introduction of things like recycling into laboratories, which is great. As you said, it's a slow adoption. And it's great to hear a manufacturer talk about the sort of energy usage outside of their own equipment and what infrastructure has to be in place to sort of alleviate the heat, as you said. There's maybe the issue we see a lot, particularly in shared buildings or university labs, is they're not paying the bill. So, when money gets involved, we see a faster sort of change in mindset. But if you speak to a lab manager, they're not associated with the bill at all. That's paid centrally by the university or by the science park. So they're not actually that conscious of energy usage, I suppose, because it's not hitting them in the wallet just yet.
I think one of the hidden ones is liquid nitrogen, where a lot of time people do have to pay for it. So it does become more of a, oh no, I'm paying this money. But liquid nitrogen costs a huge amount of energy to transform into liquid, obviously. I can't remember the exact I won't give an exact number because I'll be held to it, but the losses all the way from production to get from site are huge.
Yeah.
And the losses on the way to site, just out of the transport.
Yeah, and then I think you lose, like in a bulk tank, big tank, like 2 to 3% of the volume a day. I want to say you lose quite a lot because of pressure. You have to release the pressure because it evaporates inside the tank.
Yeah.
I'm not an expert on plastics. It's just one that I like to listen to the people who talk about this with some authority. And I know plastics is a big problem.
Mm.
It's not just plastics as well. Obviously, end of life for equipment as well. I think making sure you have a sustainable way of dealing with the problem. WEEE or anyone who can give you the guarantee of we're going to dispose of your equipment in a sustainable way. I know in our head office we have in China we have a large recycling center that does medical and non-medical refrigeration. So they break that all down and into those component parts, so the bits that can be recycled, the bits that can be put back into the supply chain.
Yeah, speaking to us would be a good idea because obviously we do specialise in end of life resale as well into places that can't necessarily afford new equipment. So we like to put that back.
That's definitely a fantastic thing. I think when you go back to the sustainability as well, it's the reduce, reuse, recycle. Recycle is the end point. That's the last thing you do. But to reuse, and reduce your dependency on new equipment. I think that's a really important step too.
And higher, not higher, operate globally. How do you think the UK compares to the rest of the world in terms of their attitude to sustainability?
The UK is pretty good, I'd say. I think we're good, not great. I don't think there's a lack of enthusiasm. I speak to a lot of lab managers, and I honestly believe that there's a lot of really genuine want to be part of the solution. And the problem in the UK isn't people not wanting to be sustainable. It's very difficult sometimes for them to do that because, as you mentioned, equipment is a good one. Sometimes the more expensive equipment is the more can be the sustainable option. Where it can take more to make something more sustainably, or it's not as as an efficient or as a mature product line, so that the economies of scale aren't quite there yet, or the volume isn't there yet. I think with some sustainable products, it's a cart horse thing where or chicken egg, where you got to be there needs to be the volume of sales to get the price down to the point where it's matching the non-sustainable option.
Yeah.
I know that can be a big problem in consumables, but from my point of view, in terms of equipment, sometimes there's a budget and they just have to stick to the budget.
Yeah.
And they can't afford to go for the energy option, which may over the next 10 years, be half the energy of the cheaper option.
Yeah.
I think it comes down to central policy. There's no good. There's no good. There's no absolute national or international standard.
Yeah.
There is no ISO standard for it. There is no fixed sustainable measuring stick you can use to say, this is more sustainable than this is more sustainable than that.
Yeah.
Here's what you should be buying. And because there's not that, I think there's no government policy that's helping these institutions. And there are some really good ones out there. I will shout out, Mind Green Labs. The ACT label is really good. I think that is definitely a step in the right direction. And you have things like LEAF. I think it's Laboratory Efficiency Assessment Framework. That's a good option. But again, these have been started by either individuals or by universities. And that's not a centralized thing. I think the UK is on the right path, definitely making really positive moves. I think what would help them is definitely some more central information, standards to work by, and some incentives as well. Universities do have some good green schemes going. I think Cambridge has good ones, Oxford as well. A lot of other universities. I'm very southerly, so as you may tell from my accent, so I don't know what some of the northern universities are doing.
Yeah.
But I imagine there are similar schemes which are trying to help move that needle in the right direction.
Yeah, you're certainly seeing new jobs pop up in universities of sustainability manager and those kind of roles, which is great because there's a focus put on it. I just want to pick on something you said about the manufacturing as well. There's got to be something in it for the manufacturer. There's a huge amount of cost in R&D. So if you're going from 10 kilowatts an hour down to 5, that must cost millions to develop that product that just kind of does that kind of reduced energy. So you can see why these products do command a slight premium, because they have to recoup those huge costs Otherwise, what's the point of the manufacturer to drive that change? He said there's no legislation they have to meet. They are doing it just to bring innovation to the market. So, credit to companies like Haya who actually put millions into that.
Higher.
Absolutely fine. I made this up myself a few
No,
times.
we'll leave that in.
Leave it in.
I like that. Leave it in. I'll just keep correcting you.
Yeah. So I think you kind of answered this next question, but are you seeing a change in your customers' mentality towards sustainability? Are they making more demands of you for lower energy products and more results?
Yeah, definitely. I think, as I said, the UK is definitely on the right track. What's happened recently, which you may be aware of, is a lot of the funding bodies have now said you'll need. I mentioned the LEAF accreditation. They do bronze, silver, gold, which are different metrics. There's like meet the bronze, you've got to meet these 18 criteria. Then you've got to meet more for silver, more for gold. Some funding bodies are actually requiring you, laboratories and universities, to have a minimum LEAF level in your lab to. I'm never sure exactly. I think it's bronze. I think it's CRUK and there's Welcome, and there's another one as well who's doing it. But I'm not. It might be MRC, but I'm not sure.
Yeah.
So it's really pushing them towards, looking at their waste streams, looking at their processes, looking at what they can do in their lab to be more efficient.
Yeah.
And being more efficient, having less waste, is a sustainable mindset because that is reducing your contribution to long-term impact.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant. So, opportunity for you to tell us a little bit about what you do and where you do it for Haya.
I wear a lot of hats, but so for Haya, I'm currently the core product manager. So I look after biosafety, I look after incubation, I look after ULT freezers. Those are my sort of primary products. So I'll do everything from stock orders, pricing, training, field visits with our sales team, and I'll be the one who supports the product behind the scenes. So knowledge base, making sure everything's up to date. But then also I do a lot of the liaising with head office and R&D. So we do a lot of work with R&D where customer feedback goes straight back. Anything that's done custom or any change that need to be made for specific stuff, I'll help handle that too. So I act as sort of the bridge between the two. It just stops too many lines of dialogue, essentially. But then I ask any question that can make it past the knowledge base we have now ends up coming to me. So I also end up answering a lot of the more like abstract technical questions where it's like something we had never been asked before. Yeah. And then I'll go out and find the answer, add it to the knowledge base, and then.
Yeah. Okay. I first met you at, I think, Lab Innovation, and I was just blown away by your product knowledge and how, like, you knew the product inside and out, which is very rare. It shouldn't be rare, but it is very rare in laboratory sales. How long have you been at Haya, and how did you start? Where were you before?
Actually, I was at a pub before I started at Haya.
Did you know each beer individually?
Yeah. I think so. I did a degree. I did biochemistry, and then I tutored for a bit. Did like some GCSE level tutoring, and then I went to a pub, which I think everyone should do. Because I think hospitality is a very humbling experience, and I think it actually makes good salespeople as well.
Yeah. We've both done it.
Yeah.
It really, because it makes it easier to talk to people you don't know.
Yeah.
And I got a job at Haya because I got handed Richard's business card one day by my dad because he bought laptops from there. And I think because he saw the word Biomedical in the title of the company, and I did a degree in biochemistry. Oh, it must be hiring. Yeah. So I called Richard up, and so the rest is history from that.
Yeah.
But 8 years as of April. So I've been with the business since there's about 5 of us in the UK, and now there's about 33.
Wow.
So over the last 8 years, the company sort of every year has changed massively for the better, I think.
Yeah.
We've grown and grown and grown, and it's sort of tracked our rise in the UK market from being quite an unknown brand, to sort of one of the more major players, not right at the top, but we definitely put up a good fight.
I think you have that nice sort of dichotomy of fantastic products, really strong brand, but also really attractive pricing as well. You're not the sort of premium prices that some other manufacturers demand.
Yeah, I think we're quite transparent with we're a large scale manufacturer, so we have enormous factories out in our home market in China, and we put a lot of investment, especially over COVID, into automation, into being more efficient. Huge amounts like solar panels, into like waste processing, everything. And I think a lot of that's fed back into the pricing where the way we ship as well, we don't do ones and twos, we'll plan months ahead and we'll order containers full and we'll optimally pack them to get as much as we can. So every little step we do is to make sure we can pass those savings on to the customer. So you don't have to make the choice between having a fantastic product and having to spend a fortune. Because a lot of the time, especially with anything technical, just because you pay more money, it doesn't necessarily make it a better product. It might just be better marketed.
Yeah.
So I like to think we sit at a reasonably, fair price point where every product we sell is cost matched to where we think the specification deserves to be.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Cool. And the best thing about working at Hire, the best thing about your job?
I think every day is very different. There's a lot of really interesting challenges you get. So before I was the core product manager, I was the London sales manager for, 6 years before that. And I think it's that ability to move up as well. So when I expressed more of an interest in trying a different role, they built a role for me. Yeah. I think there's a huge reason we retain so well is there's a huge emphasis on that, on personal development, as well as I think the team we have is fantastic. We're a medium-sized company now, like small to medium, so it still has a really great team vibe where everyone knows everyone chats all the time, and it all feels like we're working towards the same goal rather than like little cogs, just spinning.
Yeah. You've got the giant parent company, if you like.
We have this really small business-facing section in the UK. So the UK is a subsidiary of Hire Biomedical, which is a global manufacturer of medical grade and lab grade equipment. We're then owned by Hire Group. So Hire Group is like $40-50 billion turnover company, like Fortune 500. Yeah. The largest manufacturer of domestic appliances in the world. I think it's like 1 in 10 washing machines or 1 in 10 home appliances are made by us or something insane.
Wow.
But we get all that buying power and we can bring it to the lab market. And we all have our own, it's a separate factory, separate campus, but we can leverage that buying power.
Yeah.
I've seen some of the pictures from China. Enormous.
Unbelievable.
It reminds me of a kind of a German conference centre.
Analytica,
like walking around Medica.
They have a museum, the main one.
Wow. Amazing.
Massive. It's a very large facility, and 25% of it's all R&D. So the reason we can stay at the cutting edge on a product is we invest very heavily in R&D.
What's driving that innovation? Obviously, you must have counterparts in other markets all feeling similar information to drive that innovation, or
I think we've always the company sort of like very focused on R&D. I think it's very easy to make a product that someone else is making and try to make it cheaper.
Yeah.
But I don't think you last in the market if you do that. And I think I mentioned, we're a global company, but we're based in China, so there is Chinese product stigma you have to deal with. But that's why we've always put so much work into QC, reliability, and innovating. I had a saying which is innovate, don't iterate. Don't like make a small change, which you see with smartphones now that they have small changes.
Yeah.
We want to be at the forefront wherever we can be, and that's driven by a lot by our users and customers. So I'll go out and chat to people. I think we see a big rise in the demand for energy efficiency, sustainability, and that's come from a lot of the UK and European and other markets. Yeah. End users are saying we want to buy a more sustainable product. We don't want to know that a product we buy now is going to have the lowest impact it can. Over 10 years, it's going to do the least harm. Yeah. So that really helps, that really drives us. And, as a company, we do a lot to help reduce our own footprint as well.
Yeah.
It's fair to say, given the quick growth, that the market's responding really well to your innovation.
I'd like to think so, yeah. It's been we picked very hard markets to get into and I think in the UK, very established players. But slowly but surely, I think because we bring something new, and we bring it at competitive pricing. That I think that's driven a lot of the sort of demand for our product, and we've gone from a tiny percent of the market to having a fair share.
Yeah. So what objections have you had though? So obviously the pricing's great, the product's great. Have you had any kickback from the market?
I think, and this is not a UK specific objection. New brands can be scary. When you come in as a new brand with no track record, it's very difficult to convince someone who's been buying the same manufacturer for the last 10, 15 years. Yeah. That's one of the main ones we started with. But I think we sort of stood the test of time. With a -80 freezer, for example, you can't have a freezer that works most of the time. And having any kind of bad reliability with that kind of product will just kill you in the market.
Yeah.
So we've put a lot of focus on reliability, QC, and having that UK support. So we have our own service team. We keep all our parts in the UK. We can service all our own products. So having that sort of help convince people that we're for real, we're a real company.
Yeah.
And obviously, our home market originally being from China, there's still sometimes a stigma against it. I think now a lot of people have woken up and realized that a lot of the world's technology is manufactured. And I'd say the engineering team we have in our manufacturing facility are top notch. They really are. When you mentioned bringing the energy stuff down, I don't know how they did it, but they're really, really focused on bringing the best possible product to market. And I know of a lot of products which haven't made it from us, and the quality has gone back into the cycle because they weren't happy with the result.
Right. Interesting.
Yeah.
So they will reject stuff. They won't just launch it.
If you ever wonder why Hire doesn't have a low cost version of something, it's because it probably didn't meet our quality standards.
Right.
So with that in mind, tell us a little bit more about the ultra low temperature freezers that you guys.
This is something that's been consuming my life for the last few months.
Yeah.
But, we're about to release, and maybe at the time of this podcast going out, it probably will be released. I've got a new range of -8 freezers coming out, which are our ultra low energy range. And we've essentially cut the energy down by between 45 to 50% from our previous generation.
Which was already energy efficient.
Which is already our energy efficiency. So we're talking about going from 8 to 9 kilowatt hours a day to 4 to 5.
Wow.
And that's at -80. And these aren't our figures. These are Energy Star official figures. These are independent testing done by Energy Star, and the results are available online. So our new 700 litre model will be running at around 4.16 kilowatt hours a day, which may not mean anything to people who don't talk about freezers every day like me, but it's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And these new products come with a few sort of sustainable mindset design changes as well, which is the insulation we've changed. So the insulation we've got changed to LBA foam. And what this foam is, it's a non-toxic and non-ozone depleting foam. So a lot of the foams people use nowadays are HFC. So these hydrofluorocarbon agents in them. And that's just to get the expansion normally. So if you consider a global warming potential of 1 to be CO2, it's like the benchmark, that's roughly where our new insulation sits. The older insulation that a lot of, I'd say is still in use regularly with ULT freezers is around, the 2 to 250 mark. Wow. So it's 200 times worse. So that's, and the new insulation is better. It's 20% better.
It's not just more sustainable, it actually does a better job as well. Yeah. It's a win-win, isn't it?
The tagline I have crafted for this is, it's ultra low energy and ultra high performance. These new freezers are just, they're faster recovery, faster re-entry, longer hold times, but they're half the energy. So it's kind of you'd think it'd be a no-brainer.
Yeah.
But it's definitely one of those innovations we've made, not an iterate. We're not tweaking a product. We're basically completely reinventing it.
Yeah. Is it double the cost then?
No.
Okay. That would be the first question people ask.
It's the first question I would ask too.
Yeah.
But I think we're trying to buck the trend here where this is going to be a really, really efficient freezer. We're going to price it in a way that lets these labs take advantage of that.
Yeah.
And the whole tagline behind it is ultra low impact. It's an ultra low impact freezer, it's an ultra low impact on sort of CO2. So I think from our previous generation, same size, it's around 2.5-3 tons of CO2 over its lifetime less than to the previous generation. So the 830 will basically generate almost half the CO2 of the 829. And that's the equivalent of driving from London to Auckland in New Zealand.
It's incredible. Wow.
Yeah, which is an insane amount of energy. And as you mentioned earlier, I think a lot of people look at the cost. But you can do that calculation because they're equivalent. CO2 is equivalent to energy, and energy costs money, unfortunately. And so if it's saving you half the CO2, it will save you half the energy too.
Yeah.
So if you think you're spending, I don't know, 50 grand for 10 freezers over 10 years, it's 25 grand.
Yeah.
So,
well, the payback is pretty good.
Yeah. Again, going back to how they did it, don't know. Magic. But it's 100 little optimizations that have all come together to make something good.
Yeah.
New refrigeration system, smarter control scheme, better insulation, the works.
There's no magic wand. It was just marginal gains in every department of the freezer.
Millions of pounds of R&D and hundreds of headaches from the engineering team, I imagine.
But going back to what you said before as well, less energy creates less heat, and you've got less heat to then have to take away.
You're right.
So there's an energy saving across the board. It's not just that one figure that's been halved. It's less air conditioning requirements because the insulation's better, and it just has a knock-on effect entirely across the board. So,
I think it's a fantastic point that I'm glad you brought up, because it's one that people forget. It's that if you have a room full of ULT freezers, a lot of them will run at a good energy because you're keeping that room at like 19 degrees. The air conditioning is absorbing a lot of that heat. The way it works is dumping it somewhere else, and that's costing energy. So you're just shifting that burden onto the air conditioning system. And that's something that people won't measure. So when they're like, oh, my freezer runs at 10, 15 kilowatts, turn the air conditioning off and see how much it really runs at, because we do all our measurements like 20 degrees. So it's like an ambient room temperature. If you're actually buffering that with air conditioning, you're just shifting the burden of energy onto the air conditioning system.
It's great what you said about it's been independently verified. Something that Raj from My Green Lab said is, a lot of these data that we see in marketing is kind of self-produced by manufacturers. It's great that you've had an independent verification of this, and it's data that people can actually trust. The difficulty, I guess, comes when you're comparing your data to people who haven't had it independently verified. And it's kind of not apples with apples, really. But down at your levels, there's no one else that has that kind of level, I would guess.
There's someone who's close.
Okay.
But I would say when we sort of I think we sort of leapfrogged them a little bit. When it comes down to independent testing, I say the vast majority of -80 freezers are on this framework as well. It's the Energy Star one, so it's in the American. I think it's the American government who do it, but it's definitely American standard. Okay. And it's not just ULT refrigeration; they do like other refrigeration types as well.
Right. Okay.
So it's a pretty independent system.
Okay.
But I kind of feel like it harks back to the point of people will always disagree with how to test things. One of the things I'm trying to put across this new freezer is how much energy is it going to cost you per year per cryo box you put in the freezer? Because all manufacturers will give you a cryo box limit of how many will actually fit in the freezer. So that's a good measuring point, but the people could argue against that as well with, I don't use cryo boxes, I store in this medium. But then it goes back to why it's so important for us to get an international or national standard for it, because, as you mentioned, My Green Lab's doing a really good job with the ACT labeling to give you a better idea of the actual total picture of what's going on. But it's very difficult when they're having to basically write the standard where there's nothing from the government or from the international community to work from.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess it's a difficult question for you as you work for Haier, but should people swing? I've been saying it for 10 years. I can't get out the habit.
No, it's fine. Don't take it personally.
The company that you work for, should people switch from an older, inefficient unit? At what point does a -80 get to where you should actually probably switch it out, or should you leave it to run to its natural course and die?
There's a few ways of looking at it, because obviously I'd be like, just buy a new higher freezer. But I think it's more complicated than that, where we want to encourage, reduce, reuse, recycle. Getting rid of the freezer is the end goal. Obviously, that's what's going to happen 10, 15 years in the future. But I think it's why it's really important to look at things from a lifetime perspective. When people are making an assessment when they have to change a freezer, firstly, I think it can come down to budget. Fixing a freezer isn't always cheap. Fixing a handle's cheap. Fixing a fan motor's cheap. A full compressor change and regassing of the system, thousands of dollars. You're mainly paying labor, but it can be prohibitively expensive. I'd say if you have a freezer that's failed a few times, then you're sort of building a new freezer. From a sustainability point of view, I think when you buy the freezer, you got to look at the 10 years. How much energy is this going to need in 10 years? And then draw that line in the sand, or 7. I mean, I know some companies you replace faster than 10 years. It's really important to draw the line and have like a rolling replacement scheme where as you've planned for how much energy and how much cost this freezer is going to give you over 10 years, if you're in a position that you can place it, or maybe, there are some schemes, which I think you've mentioned, where this could have a second life somewhere else.
Yeah.
I've seen it everywhere, from new startups to movie props. These pieces of equipment can be given a second life. And we're very big on, if something's damaged in delivery or drive's damaged, we won't let it go to the landfill. We'll take it back and we'll fix it, repair it, and then we sell it secondhand as a QC model. Because I think avoiding the landfill is, no matter how sustainable your disposal process is, giving something a second life is always better. I think if you're coming to 7 to 10 years and you've had faults with the freezer, then definitely look to replace it. If there has been a significant increase in technology as well, if you're going to be, by replacing this freezer, offsetting half the energy, then it's a good time to do it. If you have a relatively new freezer, 5 years old, it's still running at the same energy it was, it's probably okay to keep it running. I mean, I would never be an advocate for replacing something just because you want something new. I think getting a good lifetime out of the freezer is a priority.
How much lower can it go, though, Harry? I mean, you're down at 4 or 5.
I don't know.
I mean, is it worth waiting for more technology to come out that's 2? What's the point? You're kind of at that point now where it's like probably the best it's going to get, isn't it?
There's this analogy, which is if you launch a spaceship.
You had it yesterday, didn't you?
Yeah.
If you launch,
you get overtaken.
You'll
Yesterday.
get taken over. And I think I had this exact thought in my head on the way here, which is like, you have to design for the technology you have now. Maybe we'll cut it in half again. It's diminishing returns. We must be hitting some kind of thermodynamic limit.
Yeah.
But maybe there's a technology we're unaware of. We have other refrigeration technologies we're working on now, which will be coming out probably in the new year. But apart from that, it's impossible to say what is possible. I think that's the whole thing with innovation. We put a lot of work into it. We're never going to say never we can't do it, and we're always going to aim to go better, go lower. But it's a tricky one. I'd say work with what you have available now. Don't look for the technologies coming. Work with what you have now if it's available to you, because you can't. Hindsight's 2020. You could buy a freezer now, and then tomorrow one that's twice as good at half the price comes out, but you couldn't know that.
But like you said, even if it's twice as good and it's half the energy, you're saving 2 kilowatts an hour.
Yeah,
it is diminishing returns, isn't it? You're at a point now where,
we're hitting a bit of a wall in terms of what's possible. Well, maybe I'm wrong, and maybe there is another way of doing things that, I think the people who never knew you could fly in a plane would have thought it was impossible.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. I think the rocket ship one.
We were actually at a space event yesterday.
Yeah, it was fascinating.
And one of the guys actually stood up and said that, didn't he?
That was
the first time
advice,
I heard it, but that was his advice. Don't launch a rocket now, because by the time you get to where you're going, someone will have overtaken you in a newer.
It's the same thing with satellites and that kind of stuff. They have to build. It takes so long to make them, or anything. It takes so long to make some of these large infrastructure projects that by the time it's finished, there's probably a better solution that's twice as good, half the price. But it's always wondering when is a very difficult question.
Another difficult question.
Go on.
What's the most wasteful thing that Hire do? And are you doing anything to mitigate it? And by that, I don't mean taking unnecessary public transport journeys because you left your bag on the train. From a business perspective.
Although it wasn't a train, I did train it to Liverpool. I did drive, so I mean, I'm doing my bit. I think that might be the London rep in me. Just the train is the first option always, and I only drive if I have to. Richard used to joke. My boss used to joke that I never drove anywhere. Why do I have a car? But again, it's the same thing as transportation. I'd say, you could probably talk about energy and energy usage as it being our footprint, our miners that use energy. But our specific footprint, we track it quite well. I think one of the big ones is transportation. I think one of the big things we think is, wow, it must be really awful shipping stuff from China. And I will say this. If you take, I got my numbers right here. If you take a truck or a lorry with a container full of -80 freezers from Central, Germany to the UK, it uses, I think it's like 80 kilograms. It's 80 grams per kilometer, basically. If you take a container ship from our port in Qingdao to the UK and then get it to our warehouse, so I'm adding that extra stretching, it's 1.5 tons. You're like, why would you say that? It's way more. Because that you have to then split the number down by the 20,000 containers
Yes.
on that ship.
Yeah.
If it costs 80 grams per kilometer by truck, and that number varies. Again, another one of the huge problems we face, with even benchmarking ourselves, is what number do you use? There's about 1,000 numbers online. We try to pick the most pessimistic number to protect ourselves, but there's no good international standard for it. And we get great reporting from our logistics teams, from our freight forwarders. And if it's 80 grams per kilometer by truck, it's 3 grams by kilometer by ship. And that's on a container basis. So we estimate 3% of the freezer's total carbon footprint is transportation.
Which is surprisingly low when you consider where it's coming from.
It's way more efficient to transport by ship than it is by lorry. And I think no one would disagree with the last mile is like one of the worst because of the stop-start traffic. And it's not in one freezer or 2 freezers inside of a truck. That's the way you really get killed on. And we're doing our best. I think with our packaging, our packaging's at least biodegradable. It's like recyclable or biodegradable. And a lot of it is where we can recyclable materials. There's a difficulty with packaging, which is when you transport a large piece of equipment, you don't want to use a packaging that's not as good. So you have to make that very fine balance of we want to extend, but we don't want to have to send another freezer, which would then offset hundreds worth of freezers worth of packaging.
Yeah.
But I think the team in head office done a really good job of that. But I think higher specifically, we get 15% of I think it's 50% of our energy from our own photovoltaic cells. And we put a huge amount of work into waste recycling, into waste management to really drive that amount of stuff that ends up in the landfill. We recycle as much as we can. With the parent company, as I mentioned, they set up this huge recycling plant next to our factories where we take domestic and laboratory refrigeration and recycle it. I think last year they did 2 million units.
Right. Wow.
Hard to set that up in the UK.
Yeah.
Where would you put it? Yeah. But the company's doing a lot. I think we're realizing we have our own responsibility to minimize the impact. We've recently invested pretty heavily in tracking that as well, so we can actually track our entire supply chain from start to finish for scope 3. We can track from all of our supply chain all the way down all the way to the end of the freezer, how much energy and how much CO2 it costs to manufacture that freezer to a specific unit as well. So we can track that really, really well. And they're doing a lot to try and cut that down. We've moved into a lot of automation, which really helps us dial that process too.
I think that's fantastic. I think everyone has to do it though, don't they?
Massively
It
expensive.
only works if everyone does it. Yeah.
I think that's it though. It's holding everyone up to the set. I think it's really good that other manufacturers are doing it too, even when there are competitors, because it drives competition. I mean, what you're saying drives innovation. Competition is like the mother of innovation.
Oh, yeah.
That's
absolutely
really, really important.
Yeah. Brilliant. That's very good. You mentioned the packaging there as a bit of a trade-off. It's going to be recyclable or biodegradable, but you actually have to protect the product as well. There's no point in it. Zooming out to labs on a whole, I think that trade-off's going on all the time. And do you think that labs can become carbon neutral? Or do you think there's always going to be this sort of trade-off between actually being sustainable and doing the science?
I'm not going to say it's impossible, because there are some schemes which I'm not personally a massive fan of, which are like carbon credits and offsetting your carbon. So technically it's possible. I think you have to be very careful with that kind of mentality, because you're not always sure how legitimate the credits are. Or there's been a big problem with that recently, I think. I wouldn't say it's impossible. I think getting close to it is definitely, there's a lot of really passionate people working on that problem right now.
Yeah, the aim's got to be carbon neutrality.
It has to be, yeah.
As a way of getting as close to it as possible.
Yeah. Well, aim for the stars and hit the moon.
That sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, you want to, I think it's important. I think the sentiment's there to do it.
Yeah. I
want to say it's possible. I think people are making the right kind of moves to make it possible, but being careful not to promise anything. I know we're trying our best to help labs do that with these new sustainable products we're bringing out.
Yeah.
Well, what 3 things would you implement in a lab? Say 3. Most people only pick 2 because the first one's always their products. Aside from higher equipment, what other 2 things would you implement in a lab if you could?
I'd say now I'm a very freezer focused guy. So I'm going to say some things which are service contract. I think if you're looking to reduce and reuse and not end up having something on the landfill, getting a service contract on your equipment, especially the big stuff like fridges, freezers. Well, maybe under those fridges, I guess you can make an argument, but -80 freezers for sure. Incubation. If you can look after your equipment, it will fail less, and it will last longer, and it'll also work at its prime for longer.
Yeah.
A well-maintained freezer could, it's being not just the users, not just the maintenance of it, but the other thing I'd mention is a regular user maintenance schedule for this equipment. There are pieces of equipment that can be looked after by the users, or there are small things they can do to extend the life. With a -80, defrosting once a year massively impacts the longevity. De-icing, cleaning the filter, that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Implementing that can extend the life of the freezer, and that will essentially mean your freezer will run better for longer, and you won't be looking to replace it quite as quickly. Obviously, if you do replace it, you should get a higher biomedical one. But and then another freezer one is racking. I think racking's a massive one, and it really bothers me when I open up a freezer and it's like a little city built out of boxes and tubes. Having racking is just, if you can reduce how often you're in the freezer won't work as hard, won't use as much energy. Yeah. It won't get as iced up. So if you put racking in place, then
how often you have to open it and how long it's open for.
Yeah. And I tell you what will be the test is when that freezer has a power failure or a component failure, it takes 30, 40 minutes of panic to decant, which is to remove all the samples into a new freezer for an unwrapped freezer. It may take less than 5 minutes to do it when it's racked.
Yeah.
And you know where everything is.
Yeah.
They do racks for everything now. It's not just boxes. We do tube racks. You can even do bin racks where you're just dumping stuff into this bin, but at least it's organized chaos and you can grab that out at a moment's notice. But yes, it would be service contract, racking, and then a regular user maintenance schedule. I think that would be my 3 things I would do. If you're already doing them, then you're doing a lot more than other people are, and that's definitely a step in the right direction.
Yeah, very good. Something that Raj from My Green Lab also mentioned was their freezer program, or freezer challenge, sorry. I just wanted to get your take on that, setting it at 70 to -70 and things like that. Is that a good thing to implement?
Is it one of the most asked questions I get? Is my freezer okay at -70? I think the freezer challenge is great. I think they do a great job publicizing it and supporting it. I think we sponsor it internationally as well. So it's a great thing to do. I think in a lot of cases, going to -70 is absolutely fine. With the newer freezers, you get a diminishing return. So if with our newer -80s, the Ultra Eco, you can go from, 5 point something to 4 point something, or 4 point something to 3 point something. And that's a 20% drop or 25% drop in some cases, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
But it's not going to be the 20 kilowatts to 10 kilowatts because these new freezers are already so much more efficient. I think there's also something to do with sample integrity, which is always a point I'll make, where if you know your samples are fine at -70, there's no issue running at -70. There's less far to fall if
failure. Yeah.
Now, it's a bit facetious to say that because the -70 to -80 will warm up faster than -70 to -60 because the gradient from the inside to the outside is bigger.
Right.
So there is definitely that to consider. I think it's a really good scheme in terms of reducing energy consumption. I think in a lot of cases with older freezers, you can definitely get a lot more performance, sort of lower energy out of the freezer.
Yeah.
The only thing you have to be aware of, I always say, is as long as you know your samples are going to be fine. I know there are some projects out there which are documenting what samples, I can't remember the name of it, top of my head, but there are lots of projects out there which have online free resources which do test these things. So things like degradation, especially stuff like RNA and maybe something like cell lines and stuff. Yeah. Long-term storage at -70. What does that do to the structure? What does it do to the function? That kind of stuff. But I think overall, what they're doing is really good. And I imagine you brought it up because, it's a great thing you can do to reduce the impact of your lab space.
Yeah. So first of all, check your samples will be okay at that temperature, and then maybe consider the age and the efficiency of the freezer already. If you're already one of your new freezers, it's probably less beneficial.
Yeah, it will be less beneficial, but it doesn't mean you shouldn't do it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So tell us about Hire's plans for the future. I know earlier on you mentioned recycling.
We love working at the cutting edge with our products. I think what you'll see from us is more of the same, more pushing the boat with the products we already have. So either revamping or updating. But there's a lot coming in terms of, I mentioned the Scope 3 stuff we're doing. We've done I think our team out there have done a fantastic job with this new sort of carbon tracker for our own products, for our own supply chain. So we can track it all the way from, supply chain all the way down to us, which is really, really good. And I mean, you can't see what the problem is unless you have a way of seeing the problem. You can't tell there is a problem until you can see it. But we're going to be releasing a lot of new products in the coming year. We've got shaking incubators coming with some really, really cool technology behind them, which I can't talk about too much. And next year there will be a new type of freezer we're releasing. So, I can't say too much about it, but it's some really interesting technology we've got coming out, and it's definitely a space to watch. We have this crazy expansion of, it's like 20%, 30% expansion on our product range every year, which is insane. Yeah. A lot of the new products do fall into my remit as well, so I end up looking after them, helping them. I'll make sure we pick ones that are appropriate for the market to bring to the UK and where we think we can really make a difference.
Yeah.
But I think a lot of innovation is what you're going to see from us, big push into automation too. Eventually, it's a really growing market. And I think it has a lot to do with being more sustainable, is having these central services being offered out, with automation, but also with things like freezer storage and microscopy, having these central services where they have a more, you have less people, specialists running a smaller facility, focus on that specific technique is again so you'll see a lot more, not just from us, but I think from the laboratory market in general.
You mentioned earlier that you also specialise in nitrogen storage or ultra low temperature storage. Is there any innovation in that space? It sounds quite a wasteful sort of area.
There is we're bringing out a lot of automation when it comes to ULT freezer and also to liquid nitrogen. I think liquid nitrogen is fantastic because you can get a huge density of storage.
Right.
And the innovations coming up now are mainly just to do with better vacuums, better installation, and a better user experience as well. I'm not quite as up to date with the liquid nitrogen stuff as I probably should be, but I know there's a lot of automation and semi-automation coming to that market, sort of reducing picking times, reducing how long the lids need to be open for, all that kind of technology, as well as user assistance. So there's a lot going on with solutions for lifting racks, solutions for storing racks, and picking from samples. I think that's what you're going to see a lot from us, is just a lot of our innovation is just to solve an actual problem there is in the market. We're not looking to have find a solution and then find a problem for it, essentially.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Trying to limit myself because I talk about products until the cows come home. So
No problem, I can cut it out.
And where can people find out more about Hire products then? The website?
yeah, I mean, I think the website's always a good tool to see what we do have. But we have a wealth on LinkedIn. We have a wealth of content we put out, and it's not all sell. A lot of it's just informational. We're trying to give a little bit back, especially technical teams who are out there supporting our equipment in their labs.
Yep.
We want to make sure that we're providing them with resources. I think yourselves are a good source of information about us too. You do a great job. I think you're very knowledgeable too. I'm always open to answering freezer related questions. I love talking about freezers, obviously. So if you do have any questions, I'm always happy to answer them.
Put them in the comments.
Yeah.
Questions, put them in the comments.
I'll personally answer all the questions in the comments. But we have a great sales team as well. We have a fantastic, very technical sales team. So they're very knowledgeable in the products and also applications as well. So they're not just out there to sell you a freezer. They're there to talk to in a more advisory, consultancy role too.
No, I think that's a really good point. And as you said earlier, it seems like a really great place to work, and that leads to tenure of people, who leads to experience, and then that knowledge builds. So you have got a really knowledgeable team who've been there quite a long time, like yourself. So it's not like a company that has a high turnover of staff and you lose that expertise.
Yeah, I'm like part of the ship now, 8 years. I'm like the second longest employee behind Richard in the UK office anyway.
Yeah.
Where do you see yourself in 5 years? Richard seat?
I think the product manager stuff's going more global, maybe more international. I know I've been asked to do a lot more international stuff, so maybe that's the way it's going. In the UK, we have a fantastic team, and it's really leveraged globally as well. So a lot of the UK team will be there to help our international team in Europe, in America, all over the globe. So
Yeah.
maybe that's where it's going. I don't think I'd want Richard's job. He's a very hardworking guy. I know he has to put out a huge number of fires as well. So he's not a job that I don't think I could do or I'd want to do. But he's definitely the guy for it. He's really helped us push into. I mean, he's really pushed us from this small 5-person outfit to the large, 30+ outfit we have today.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and not easy for you to travel to America on a train, I would have thought. So.
Yeah, it's a long swim, actually.
Good shipping container, though. That'll keep the CO2 emissions up.
Yeah, definitely. I think Europe, though, you can get a train.
Oh, yeah.
There's actually a train. We can transport from all the way from China to Europe via train.
Yeah.
It's something we don't like doing. It's only in case of emergency, really, but it's definitely a lot more sustainable than using air freight, which we try to avoid in any situation. It's actually very difficult to air freight -80 freezers because of the refrigerant limits.
Right. And the cost, I would have thought.
Yeah, it's a massive,
Yeah.
almost as expensive as the freezer itself.
I can imagine. Okay, brilliant. So is there anyone else you'd recommend that we have on the podcast?
Oh, I think there's some really great. My first one would recommend would have been Raj Katie from My Green Labs.
Too late.
Yeah, but there are some people who have some fantastic knowledge on the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
People like Stuart Sale. I think he's a fantastic source of consumable and equipment knowledge, and he's spoken to so many different industries and so many different people that I think he has a fantastic, complete perspective.
You're not the first person
second
to
person to nominate him.
So, Stuart, if you're watching this or listening to us on one of your 25-mile jogs that you do before breakfast, it's about time that you came on here.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Harry. As usual, great depth of knowledge there, and hopefully the listeners got a lot out of it. If you do need a new freezer, you know the man to speak to, Alex. But yeah, thank you. And Al, do you want to get them to subscribe?
Don't forget to like, subscribe, hit the bell icon, and you won't miss another episode of the Science and Healthcare Sustainability Podcast with Higher
Biomedical.
Yeah.
Thank you for having me.
You're very welcome. Thanks for coming.
Science and healthcare.